listening to iCannabisRadio.com.
Welcome to In the Lab with Genifer, but Genifer is not in the lab today. She is out educating the good people in the Northeast about testing in Boston, so she will be back next week. I'm Jill Lamoureux, and today we are going to have a show on, it's going to be Hemp 101. I am extremely interested in hemp. I have been for a while. It is probably got better possibilities for this country than even legalizing marijuana. The things that hemp can do just never cease to amaze me. We have Erick Hunter here, who is part of Hemp Cleans and has been working on the hemp remediation project. We were going to have Ben Holmes. He couldn't make it, so hopefully I'm going to quiz Erick pretty good, and he knows more than we could ever talk about in an hour. I did want to let everybody know that we did post all the information about the Cannabis Cup contest on Facebook. So go to the iCannabis Facebook page, and it is posted as an event. And I will post the 3 questions from today there later today. I also wanted to let everybody know that on Georgia's show tonight, she is going to honor Advocate Niles Puckett, who unfortunately passed. She is also going to have a party here at the studio starting at 6 o'clock, so if you can make it, come on down. We would love to see you. The Westward just did a very lengthy, and I thought pretty well done, article on the Green Team. So if you have not read it, go ahead and read it. It is not on the marijuana blog. It was the cover story of this last issue. It's a good 6-pager, I think. Erick, how did you think that article was? Was it?
Melanie did a fantastic job. She hit all the right points and did her research, so I'm very impressed.
Good. Good to hear that. Well, let me just start with, generally in the Lab with Genifer and Can Labs tests marijuana. And so could you just start and tell us a little bit about the difference between marijuana and hemp to start with?
Hemp is generally cannabis sativa, which is the same genus and species as the sativa marijuana that we're all familiar with. The difference is that it has less than 0.3% THC. That's the way it's defined under Amendment 64. And also the phytoremediation bill, which was passed last June, and also the upcoming industrial hemp legislation that will hopefully be introduced this week, but I can't promise that.
Why don't we actually step back a little bit and tell us about yourself and how you started working on this project?
So my experience with hemp goes back to when I was a child, and my father had a piece of property that he held as an investment property, and he had a farmer that grew wheat and soybeans, and it was covered with industrial hemp. And got a photo of it right here. And for scale, I have a picture of myself standing in the field. Right on the edge of the wheat field is the hemp. And those are the descendants from the plants that were grown during World War II for the Hemp for Victory program, which supplied our soldiers and such notable drug warriors as George H. Bush with rope and other products that they needed to fight the war. So I had always been interested in this mysterious plant. My dad told me that technically it was illegal to have it there, but that the cops didn't really care because they knew it was just hemp. And so when I got to college, I read Jack Herer's book and was very impressed by that, and always was looking for a way to see if I could bring back the old days of the hemp farm, which sadly is now all subdivisions. And so my training is in engineering, and about 2 years ago, after the Obama administration said they weren't going to crack down on the dispensaries, I thought, well, if we have high-grade marijuana growing in Colorado, we might as well have hemp. And I found Linda Parker's website, met with her, and a few months later, she introduced me to Jason Love, who was the author of the phytoremediation bill. And so ever since then, I've been devoting all the time I can to learning as much about hemp as I possibly can.
Very cool. Phytoremediation, that's a big word. Can you explain exactly what that means and what that bill did?
Yes, phytoremediation is the use of a plant to remove a toxic substance from soil, whether it be a metal or an organic contaminant such as a petroleum spill. And all plants, of course, take up chemicals and elements from the ground because you give them fertilizer and then it sucks it up. But what we're looking at is specifically the uptake rates of hemp for things like arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mining waste. Mostly is what we're focused on now, but it can be used to remove salt from the soil, which is a big problem with Colorado farmers because they're using groundwater for irrigation. So the bill allows us to study it using this particular plant. Of course, you could use sunflowers or any number of plants, but because there's so little work done in hemp, because it's essentially been illegal, not technically, but it's been discouraged by the federal government for about 50 years now. It's really time to look at it and see what it can do because it's one of the highest yielding biomass plants available and requires no pesticides and herbicides and so forth.
And then after hemp would be used or grown to clean these mining sites and other contaminated areas, could it then be reused for something else?
Well, that's what we don't know. One of the things you have to consider when you use a material is what happens during the life cycle of that material. For example, in Grand Junction, they used uranium mill tailings to build homes. And they did that because the tailings were the right consistency and they had a certain amount of lime in it. And I would say several decades later, they had to dig up those homes and fix the sidewalks that were made out of uranium ore and so forth. So it all depends on what the contaminant levels in the hemp products would be, and that would guide the proper disposal method, or in the case of your question, how they are used if they are reused.
And you have done some small tests already, correct?
That's right. We did a 4-plant study. 2 plants were grown in mine waste and 2 were grown in clean soil. And we used X-ray fluorescence to determine what metals were taken up by the plants that were grown in the contaminated soil. And what we found was that it removed copper, which is considered by the EPA to be a toxin. And so if we had some more funding, we could have done some more detailed analysis by more expensive methods, and it most likely would have shown that the plants were uptaking lead and cadmium and other metals.
So you used an X-ray technique. A lot of dispensaries and cannabis operators have a hard time finding testing, and thankfully Colorado does allow for labs. But would you have the same problem trying to take hemp in to be tested for contaminants to a state lab, or could you go to CSU Extension, or how does that work?
Well, that depends on what contaminants you're looking for. If you're looking for organic contaminants, you would have to take in fresh material. If you were looking for metals, like I would be with the mine waste study, you could simply put the material in an oven, heat it to the point where it's carbon and minerals, essentially, and then ship it anywhere in the U.S. because they couldn't prove it was hemp to begin with. You could say it was sunflowers.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Now, you can ship some hemp now throughout the country. Is that correct? But my understanding is it has to be like stripped clean and can only be stalk.
That's right. Stalk or sterile seed are the only products that you can ship. If it's got any leaf material or flowers, then technically you're violating federal law, which is ridiculous, but yeah, they're in charge.
So sterile seed, now that would mean that it's used for food?
That's right. You can import hemp seeds from Canada that have been heat treated for food purposes. Of course, they're not as nutritious as if they were not heat treated because the heat does break down the oil, but they're still more nutritious than most anything you'll find at the grocery store.
Well, and that's probably better than irradiation or other methods. I was going to ask you how they sterilize them.
Yeah. Well, irradiation by gamma rays would probably be the best way to sterilize them. Of course, it would be best if we didn't have these stupid laws to begin with, so we could just import seed that hadn't been treated at all. But gamma rays aren't something that's going to make the seed radioactive or change any of its physical properties. It'd be like putting something into a microwave because gamma rays are essentially photons. They're on the same electromagnetic spectrum as microwaves or light, essentially.
Well, that's interesting, and I've always wondered about that because I know that Betracan and a lot of the European manufacturers of marijuana do irradiate their material, and I had always wondered what impact that has. Would it affect potency, or it's good to know that it's not toxic, but could it affect potency then?
No, and that's how spices are sterilized because spices come from tropical areas usually, or in some cases, and they might contain bugs or fungus or anything. And if you heat spices to kill all that, then you ruin the spices. So the majority of spices are processed by that method specifically because it doesn't affect potency.
Or flavor then?
Or flavor, or smell.
That's cool. Can you talk a little bit about Hemp Cleans? And you talked about fundraising, and basically if people are interested, how can they get involved, and where does the project go now? Are you going to be able to do larger scale tests?
Well, if you'd like to meet us, we're going to be at the Capitol building for Hemp Lobby Day on Wednesday from 8 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. And if you'd like to help out, we could use anything to offset the costs that we've incurred so far for not only doing the research, but driving around the state, talking to farmers, trying to build a hemp industry. And that there's a PayPal button on our website at www.hempcleans.com.
Very cool. Are we ready for a break?
We can take one.
Yeah, let's take a break.
Blue Sage Microbes unveils the ultimate in superior soil, Ideal Soil, a 16-quart bag of the best growing soil ever engineered. Superior plant health and vitality is a direct result of the structure and chemistry of your soil. How good is your growing soil? Is your growing soil really balanced? How do you know? Well, Blue Sage Microbes has a newly designed growing soil that is the most advanced growing medium ever offered for cannabis cultivation. This is the only brand in the marketplace that provides growers with an ideal soil structure designed to work specifically with their cultivation systems. You will have your best grow results ever. Call now for a special introductory offer, 888-959-8551, or log on to bluesagemicrobes.com and experience a new level in growing. That's 888-959-8551.
Tired of dispensary hopping? Trying to find quality meds? Look no further and get to know Greenworks. Our shops are stocked with over 20 strains of organically grown meds, including R4, the highest tested CBD strain in Colorado. Yes, we back up our quality with testing. While Greenworks offers only the highest quality meds, we don't believe in high prices, with eighths ranging from $20 to $40 and ounces capped at $175. With 2 centers in Denver and 1 in Glenwood Springs, we're likely closer than you think. Call 303-647-5210 to find the location nearest you.
I'm Gary Johnson, and you're listening to iCannabis Radio, and I want to say, talk it up, Colorado.
Okay, we're back. And during the break, we were talking a little bit more about, I'm just really curious about kind of the genetic differences between hemp and marijuana. And when people talk about ditchweed that they used to find when they were kids, that's what you were showing us pictures of. Would that have typically been hemp?
Yes, ditchweed is considered hemp. Now, hemp is not a strictly scientific term. It's evolved into a colloquial usage which differentiates it from marijuana. Basically, you cannot get high on hemp. You can get high on marijuana. Haney did a study on the wild hemp in Illinois and went through and cataloged thousands of plants, checked them for THC, and what he found was that majority of them were less than 1%, but he found plants up to 2%. So what you see is genetic variability that existed from the way that the plants were collected and where the seed was sourced from. Because back in the day, they would just get it from China or Europe, and there was no strict set of controls on the THC limits like Canada and Europe has now. So there are anecdotal tales of people getting high from smoking ditchweed, but the majority of anecdotal tales will come out something like, well, we tried it and it didn't work. It's what I've heard. I do know people that smoked the hemp from my old farm where I grew up, and they said it didn't do anything.
So do you know, like, the other chemicals in hemp then, compounds? So would we find CBD and THCV, and is THC the only thing that differentiates between a hemp plant and a marijuana plant?
Legally speaking, yes. But from a practical standpoint, if the THC is below 1%, it's not going to do anything to you. And you'd have to get it up to 2% or more before it'd be even worth messing with. And a lot of it's seeded too, so that means you got to pick the seeds out. So it's not usable as marijuana. Certainly nothing like you see advertised in the Westward.
Right, but do you know the levels of CBD? Because that, a lot of people are really discovering the benefits of CBD and looking for marijuana in particular that has very, very low THC and very high CBD, and are crafting oils to get a 25-to-1 ratio. And is there a plant that we could find from the hemp world that you could breed to have those that identity?
Oh, they already exist. And in Israel, they developed strains that have very high CBD and very low THC. And the headlines said that they came up with a new type of hemp that doesn't get you high. But what they did was they used the hemp strains that already existed and bred it to something that was predictable. So they didn't really invent anything new. High CBD, low THC hemp has been around forever, and I wouldn't be surprised if the wild ditchweed that we find all over the Midwest fits that profile.
So is hemp or marijuana not indigenous to this country, and seeds were imported hundreds of years ago when Washington was growing hemp, and it's always been imported? That's
true. Even before Washington, the Spaniards were the ones that supposedly brought it in. They brought it to Central America first, and then it came over with the colonists, because back in the day, a ship required tons of hemp for rigging and sails. So they would often pack large barrels of hemp seed in case the ropes and the sails happened to wear out before they could get back to a port where they could buy some more, they'd just grow some hemp and then process it wherever they were. They were extremely resourceful people, and they had to be. They didn't have FedEx back then.
Well, you can't FedEx marijuana or hemp now either, so.
Well, unless it's Dixie Elixir's CBD. They just, I guess, got permission to do that.
Dixie Elixir is one of our great sponsors. So that, is it the same plant that's, I guess let's start with what are all the things that hemp can do? We hear it's food, fuel, medicine, construction products. So what are the best and most interesting uses for hemp?
Well, right now I'm all about the CBD because it shows promise in preventing Alzheimer's, which
Really?
I guess, I don't know if Alzheimer's has been increasing or we're just better at detecting it now. But it's been shown in some research that Alzheimer's is due to a breakdown of transmissions between the CB2 receptors in the brain and the CBD in marijuana and hemp is useful at preventing that breakdown. And I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on TV, so I don't have all the knowledge about that, but I have read some of the papers, and I think that is probably the highest value use for me anyway. But we have so many other uses. Another top use, of course, would be seed oil, because the seed has a better nutritional profile than just about any vegetable oil that exists, specifically the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, which is 4-to-1, which World Health Organization says that's the best ratio to have for proper nutrition. And so the other aspects, of course, when you process the stalk, you can get the herds, which are useful for oil absorbent and animal bedding and hempcrete, and the list goes on. I mean, someone estimated that hemp has tens of thousands of uses, so we'd be here for a while. But
Like duct tape.
Those are. Well, I'm not a big fan of duct tape really, because it leaves a sticky residue all over everything it touches. But those would be my top uses right there: is nutrition and pharmaceuticals.
So is it the same plant or seed that is used for food or for fuel or for medicine, or is it different types of plants that have different uses?
Well, most hemp strains are bred for a specific purpose. Some are bred for fiber, some are bred for seed, and there are dual-use varieties that don't do either one to 100% of what you'd want them to do, but can be used for both purposes. And there are oilseed strains that produce a particularly nutritious and specifically clear type of oil. So that's one of the reasons why you wouldn't want to grow marijuana around hemp if you're trying to get the ultimate value out of your hemp seed oil, is because marijuana tends to produce seed oil that's cloudy because it hasn't been bred specifically for clear vegetable oil purposes. So there's a lot of science that goes into the breeding of hemp for specific purposes.
Well, and you mentioned that, and that's one of the things I've heard from marijuana, cannabis for THC growers, is that if hemp is around marijuana, it will actually overtake it and pollinate it and reduce your THC to, it's basically the dominant plant.
Right. It is, the low THC is the dominant condition, the phenotype. And what happens is you don't get hemp plants necessarily with an increasing THC content over the successive generations. You get marijuana with decreasing THC content. So there's really no benefit to trying to hide marijuana in a hemp field for anyone. And in Kentucky, they tried to say, well, it's just for the first generation, because you can take that first generation of marijuana and pick out the seeds and get some good smoke. And anyone that's actually tried to breed those two together will tell you that you don't get much at all, and what you do get is just barely smokable and definitely not saleable.
So it will seed it then?
It will seed it, because the male plants, nobody goes out to a hemp field and pulls out the males unless they're doing specific breeding. And so there's just pollen everywhere. And it only takes one plant to pollinate thousands of females and over a fairly large area.
So is there a concern, or what is the thought process if we do allow outdoor marijuana growing and we do allow hemp growing? How far apart do these plots need to be? And is there a way to coordinate that? And is there any other plants that you know of that are cultivated that have these kinds of issues, like pollination issues?
To answer your first question, I have heard up to 7 miles separation to avoid cross-pollination. I can't say specifically in all cases. I'm sure that depends on weather patterns and sizes of fields. Most of the highest quality bud in Colorado is grown indoors anyway, so HEPA filters take care of that problem. But also, we have a lot of areas in Colorado that don't permit commercial grows. So we need to work on those legislators that live in those areas and represent those areas to allow for industrial hemp cultivation, and then there won't be any conflict with large outdoor medical and social use grows.
Well, I think the majority of people I talk to who want to do outdoor would like to do greenhouse so that they can have those HEPA filters going regardless, because there's other things, powdery mildew in the air generally, that they want to prevent from touching the crop. How many, so 64 happened, and I know with the task force, they decided to have a separate bill. And so I guess who's sponsoring that, and how is that taking shape, and do you think it will go to the legislature before May, get out before May?
We're hoping that it's introduced on Wednesday of this week, but there's no guarantee of that. We're just hoping because it's Hemp Lobby Day. And we're working closely with Gail Schwartz on the bill. And so we've picked up a lot of support on that. And we wanted to craft the bill so that it makes it as easy as possible for farmers to grow hemp. And also, we want to make sure that it doesn't get confused with the growing that's going to be occurring for social use. So we didn't want to be as restrictive as Canada in requiring background checks and constant testing and so forth. So really, it's just geared towards improving the economy of Colorado and having some common sense regulations in place.
Right. And so I know there's a ton of people who, even just in the state, could benefit from hemp fiber, Hood Lab, and other folks. How is the demand, and what is the attitude of farmers? Are they wanting to get involved?
They're really desperate. We've had several years of drought, and fortunately we had high corn prices last year, but that was at the expense of a lot of farmers, because the ones that didn't have irrigation, didn't have the water rights to grow and irrigate late into the season, weren't able to reach full yield. So every place we've stopped, we've had farmers express interest in joining the phytoremediation pilot program, which covers farmers for this spring planting season until the industrial hemp regulations are in place when the new bill passes.
And so when the farming season, when would they have to be planting? And I guess we'll wait till after the break, because I kind of want to talk about the seed stock and how this will unfold in Colorado when we get back. So.
The chocolatiers at Incredibles are dedicated to crafting the finest chocolate from high-quality ingredients to ensure the greatest possible medicated edibles in the world. Consistency and quality are top priority. Lab testing on each and every batch. Rick and Josh have been making non-medicated chocolates for years for such retail outlets as Whole Foods and Vitamin Cottage. Today, we are focused on crafting our award-winning medicated incredible chocolate bars. We are professional bakers, and we believe food should be made from scratch. We guarantee your satisfaction. Have an incredible day.
Indispensary in Colorado Springs is proud to support Overgrow the Radio. With 2 locations in Colorado Springs, Indispensary invites you to discover what true selection and values feel like. Always featuring an incredible array of Stanley Brothers medicine as well as full line of edible and infused products. Indispensary is open from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. 7 days a week, 364 days a year. You owe it to your health and well-being to discover Indispensary. Westside location at 3044 West Colorado and Eastside location at 3031 East Platte in Colorado Springs. Indispensary is your destination for indispensable quality medicine.
Welcome back. And so I kind of wanted to talk about, you mentioned planting, so I guess we'll go back to seed stock. And if I wanted to grow some hemp plants now under 64 for food or for seed or for my kitchen or to make my own oil, is that possible? And if so, where would I get the seeds?
So to answer your first question, it is possible. You could grow up to 3 vegetative and 3 flowering cannabis plants under Amendment 64. The second option would be to join the phytoremediation pilot program. So that's how you would be covered legally. Not too many people are going to be growing industrial hemp commercially and making a lot of money at 6 plants. So that's why we have the new bill coming out. The second part of your question was,
could I do it for if I wanted to produce my own oil? So you're talking about nutrition. Would 6 plants be enough?
No, 6 plants would get you up to speed as far as making a bigger garden, because you could breed them and get more seeds out of it. But you would have to be covered under the pilot program, or you would have to wait until later on this year if you're going to start indoors to be covered under the industrial hemp regulations. So if you didn't do either one of those things, you'd be in a legal gray area.
How many plants if you signed on to the remediation program, are you allowed to have then?
You can have up to 10 acres, and so that would be 4 million plants at a seeding rate of 70 pounds per acre of seed.
And how much would that produce in equivalent oil once you?
So you get about 1,000 pounds of seed per acre. So that's about 300 pounds of oil. And you would get about 33 gallons per acre of oil.
So that's a lot of work to just make oil for the kitchen. So hopefully more and more people will be doing this for us. So will we see the price of hemp food products come down in Colorado eventually because of this?
Yes, we're hoping to cut the price of hemp food product in half, because most of what you pay is shipping.
Right.
It has to come from Manitoba or Saskatchewan, or in some cases China.
So is China and Canada the 2 biggest producers right now, and where everything's coming from?
Most of the hemp products that come from China are fiber, but food products do sneak their way in here. Most of the hemp foods, that product does come from Canada, although you can order hemp food products from Europe. There's the hempshop.co.uk is one site.
So how is the market in Canada? Are they producing enough, not enough? Are they happy to see states start to come on board, or how are they feeling about this?
They wish they had planted more last year because they can't keep hemp products in stock. So the farmers that planted as much as they could were making a lot of money, specifically in Alberta. They did really well last year, and the production will be higher for next year.
You said it's pretty restrictive up there, though, as far as the ability to grow and testing. And that's obviously probably something you heard from them when you're looking at writing Colorado's legislation. Is there anything in the legislation that you guys didn't want, or anything you didn't get that you wanted, or has this been pretty smooth sailing?
Well, it's not impossible to grow up in Canada, and I haven't heard too many complaints, but one of the things we didn't want to mess with was background checks, because why would someone need background checks to grow corn or wheat? And that's really where we're headed with this. At some point, the federal government is going to drop this hemp prohibition, and it's going to be like any other commodity. So we're gearing our laws towards that. And up in Canada, they had a tough time convincing people that this wasn't a scam to legalize marijuana or any number of conspiracy theories. So they had to put that stuff in there. But now that we have medical marijuana and social use marijuana, the hemp is not going to be a problem.
Is it a problem that it's just in Colorado and not in other states? Does that pose a problem for farmers here?
Not really. Well, the only problem is that we can't get registered seed varieties. So that's more of a function of a federal prohibition than the other states per se. So just like with our medical marijuana program, where did all this bud come from? I don't know. There was no legal way to import marijuana seeds or clones, but they just kind of showed up. But the hemp thing's a little bit different because you need pallets of seeds. You need hundreds of pounds of seed and not just a little packet of 10 from Amsterdam or Cali Connection or whatever. So that's the biggest problem we're fighting now, is how do we get seed? And we don't know exactly. Seeds just find their way in.
Other than, will someone here be working on that and trying to build seed stock, or is there a plan with like photoremediation project? You guys have had some plants going. Are people starting to breed seeds?
We have heard anecdotal evidence to that effect. That
but you need hundreds of pounds.
You need about 70 pounds per acre. So when you consider that hemp seed or hemp plant has 500 or even 1,000 seeds per plant, then your propagation rate increases dramatically. You go from one seed to 500 or 1,000. The only tricky part is what are the genetics of that seed, because anyone that breeds marijuana knows that if you take a hybrid seed that you get from your little packet of 10 and you grow that out and you pollinate the males or pollinate the females with the male pollen and you grow those plants out, you're going to get plants that look different from the parent plants. Right. So parents are P1 and then the descendants of that are F1. And any recessive genes start to show up the more you keep breeding the same plants together. And so that will eventually cause loss of vigor and lower yields and undesirable traits. However, it can work in your favor if you start with some unknown seed and you keep yanking out the sickly-looking plants and saving the good ones and back-crossing them to figure out what the genome is, what the genetic fingerprint is, then you're okay. But we just don't know how that's going to play out. If the federal government drops the prohibition next year, we might be importing pallets of seed from Canada.
Is there a bill introduced that would do that?
Yes. Rand Paul is sponsored an Industrial Hemp Farming Act, and Ron Wyden is the co-sponsor on that. And I'm guessing that Mitch McConnell is probably backing that as well, since he came out with Rand Paul and they said that hemp cultivation should be legal in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm. And that bill died pretty fast in Kentucky, though, didn't it?
Well, it died a slow and painful death. They gave the patient the EK. What am I trying to say? The zapper.
Paddles.
Yeah, and they brought him back to life a couple times, but in the end, he just didn't make it. They had to call it quits. What happened was that it got a lot of support from the Republicans. It had a lot of opposition from the police, who get money from the federal government for eradicating ditchweed, which is, any hunter knows, is a good thing for the wildlife, but that's their cash crop, is cutting down ditchweed and burning it, and so they didn't want to see it legalized, and so they came out with all sorts of conspiracy theories about thieves in the night hiding plants and all this craziness. And as I mentioned, the first generation is okay, but what in the end, what happened was Greg Stumbo, the Speaker of the House, who's a Democrat, opposed it because he didn't want the Democrats to, he didn't want the Republicans to make that issue theirs, because Mitch McConnell is fighting for his life there, which is one of the reasons he came out in favor of hemp, because at this point the GOP is in big trouble if they don't move towards the libertarian side, because the libertarians are flocking to the Democrats and saying, you guys, this marijuana thing is so stupid, and the hemp thing's even stupider. So even though we don't like the Democrats, we're not voting for prohibitionists anymore. And that's why you see people like Rand Paul getting traction.
Back to conspiracy theories. Why did hemp ever become illegal?
Okay, so you could go with the Jack Herer theory, which I subscribe to. There are other people that say, well, it wasn't a very important crop in 1937 anyway, so it just kind of died off on its own. But I've looked at both sides, and I'm convinced that it was the work of 5 robber barons, who include William Randolph Hearst, the publishing giant, who had timber holdings and who had been making paper rather cheaply using the Kraft process, which involves sulfuric acid and is pretty nasty, polluting process. But if hemp was around to provide better quality paper pulp, then his timber holdings would have been worthless. So he went down to Mexico, and he had his people staking out square miles of forest down there to turn into paper, and Pancho Villa chased him out of there. And while they were chasing them out of there, Hearst's boys noticed that they were singing this song, La Cucaracha, which contains a reference to marijuana, which is Mexican slang for cannabis. And so white people went to the drugstore and they got a bottle of cannabis extract made by Park Davis or Squibb or Eli Lilly or any of the other big names that are still around. And if they had a toothache or they couldn't sleep or back pain or whatever, they just took a shot of that and they were fine. And unlike the other stuff, they didn't get addicted or overdose and die. And so Hearst came up with this terrible Mexican menace called marijuana, which nobody had ever heard of, and was able to convince everyone through his newspapers that this was a terrible scourge, and it was mostly brown people that were using it, even though white people were using the same stuff. And so he got a lot of public sentiment against it, and he teamed up with DuPont, who was pushing synthetic fibers, and Anslinger, who was an out-of-work alcohol prohibition agent, and Rockefeller, who wanted to build the pharmaceutical industry. So he only funded schools, colleges specifically, that had medical schools that pushed this new synthetic medicine thing. And so between those guys, they got a bill introduced in Congress to tax marijuana. And what they didn't try to do was a constitutional amendment, because the 18th Amendment was on its way out. The Volstead Act was not very popular, so they thought, well, we'll never get popular support for a constitutional amendment to outlaw cannabis, so we'll just sneak this tax act in here. And some of the members of Congress were quoted as saying they didn't even know what this stuff was, and they probably had a bottle of cannabis extract at home. And so it was the perfect storm, and they got it passed, and the American Medical Association spoke against it, and they said, hey, this stuff is valuable, we can't outlaw it. And so after it passed, you had to pay $100 to be a producer, or $1 to be a producer of marijuana, and $100 to transfer an ounce of bud, which today wouldn't be a whole lot, but back then, when an ounce of marijuana that you could smoke would be about $1, it was not happening. And to add insult to injury, they wouldn't issue the permits. And that was the genius of the Marijuana Tax Act, is they said they were going to issue permits, and they didn't. So that's how it became practically illegal.
And so how hard did you guys have to work at the Capitol to be up against, as I think Westward said? Oh, let's take a break, and then we'll come back and talk about hemp's sexier cousin.
iVita Wellness is committed to compassionate patient care while providing the highest quality medicine at an affordable price. At iVita Wellness, patients can get top shelf ounces for $150 every day. iVita Wellness also carries pharmaceutical grade pure CO2 oil. iVita Wellness is located in Uptown Denver on 1616 Pearl Street, open 7 days a week from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. You can reach us at 303-952-9150 or our website at www.ivitawellness.com. iVita Wellness is Denver's compassionate care center.
My question kind of popped up in my head is so the Marijuana Tax Act was pretty successful in lumping hemp and marijuana into one category. Have you guys had a difficult time at the legislature while Amendment 64 is going through talking to people about the differences between hemp and marijuana, or are people more educated now?
Colorado is unique in that people are pretty comfortable with the subject of cannabis, and so we didn't have much trouble at the Capitol. The problem with the federal authorities is that in 1937, or in 1969, when the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 was ruled unconstitutional because Timothy Leary, tune in, turn on, drop out, got busted in Texas with a joint, brought up the point that he couldn't pay the tax without incriminating himself, and that violates the Constitution. So they threw it out, and they came out with the Controlled Substances Act of 1970 the following year. They did exempt industrial hemp from that, but the DEA eventually worked their way in there, and they said, well, it contains a trace amount of THC, so it really is a controlled substance. And you can still import the birdseed and the rope and so forth, but you can't grow it because the flowers have THC in them. And that's how they've been able to bring that into their little sphere of influence and scare farmers into not being able to grow it and require permits to manufacture Schedule I substance and so forth. And in 2000, they tried to ban hemp foods, which is absolutely ludicrous when you consider how healthy hemp foods are. And they said, well, you're going to fail your drug test. And more specifically, they said it was a stalking horse for legalization. And so they said, basically, it's illegal to advocate a certain political viewpoint, and we are going to use this law to punish you, which is not legal at all under the First Amendment, and they eventually were shot down by the Ninth Circuit Court, I believe. They lost the case on appeal, And so now we have hemp foods, or we have had hemp foods since 2002.
And that was back in 2000. Have you seen changing attitudes at the federal level, or are they still just... I mean, with medical marijuana, we see kind of these different U.S. attorneys exercising their own agenda in their district. Do you see that happening? Is there much discussion at the federal level? Have they talked about Colorado?
The way I see it, the crackdowns in California and Montana are originating from local pressure, because in California they have a nonprofit system, but everyone wants to make a profit. So everybody is making a profit, and the local sheriffs say, well, we can't do anything about it because it's legal under state law. And so the federal attorneys come in, or the federal prosecutors, and shut it down. But you see in states like Colorado, where we have the seed to sale system and everything's regulated, and there's not a lot of local opposition to it, we've been left largely alone. So it's very difficult to compare the federal response to industrial hemp as it compares to marijuana, because there's really only one case where the feds came in and they shut down industrial hemp, and that was Alex Whiteplume on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. And he was growing wild hemp, so there's really no telling exactly what the THC level and that stuff was. It was probably lower than 1%, but he didn't have strict regulations in place at the time to say this stuff is all below 0.3% and it's a particular cultivar and he's got a license. But the DEA came in 3 years in a row and just whacked it down. He told me, Alex Whiteplume told me personally, that the third time they showed up, they put the fear of God into him, and they said, basically, if you do this again, you and your whole family are going to federal prison for the rest of your lives. And so he hasn't tried it since. Of course, it still grows there naturally, and nobody will ever be able to get rid of it all unless they start aerial spraying with Agent Orange or something. But we really don't know what the feds are going to do on this one. And we hope they leave us alone, because we're trying to create jobs, and that is the number one issue. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. Job creation is a number one issue. And if you look at all the jobs that we export to Canada, it becomes a no-brainer to allow us to grow industrial hemp. They haven't had any problems with any Rastas hiding pot plants and hemp fields. It hasn't happened anywhere. And when you consider it's grown in places like Japan, where you get 5 years in prison for one joint, and it's not like here where they threaten you with 5 years and you get a month. It's honestly one of the worst places to get caught with marijuana. But in Japan, if you want to grow industrial hemp, you sign a paper and you give the government $60 and you just go for it. And so it's really out of whack, not only with the fact that certain states have legalized medical marijuana and social use, but just out of whack with other countries. At least 30 other industrialized countries allow industrial hemp. So my guess is that the federal government doesn't want to go to trial over something like this, because they're going to have to justify their statement by the DEA head Asa Hutchinson back in 2000, and again Gil Kurlikowski last year, saying that all hemp contains marijuana. That's what they keep saying. And if you consider marijuana to be something that you can get high from, it doesn't contain marijuana, not only because the THC levels are low, but the CBD levels are in excess of 2-to-1 ratio, CBD to THC. And so even if you made hashish out of industrial hemp, there would still be too much CBD in it for you to effectively get high, because, as we all know, CBD is the anti-drug. It's not your coach. It's not your teacher. It's CBD.
Wow. And, I mean, that's part of their problem is we can't do much research. And our last show last Monday, or some parents who are giving their children high CBD oil and having amazing effects, but just having to do it with this wing and a prayer and say, well, let's hope this works. And I was having a discussion with somebody who said, I was talking about this and saying compared to all these other pharmaceuticals, and he looked at me and he's like, all these narcotics are also plant-based. And I was like, that's right. The pain relievers are opiates from opium. So maybe we can look at legalizing opium in the next couple of years.
Well, curiously enough, it's not illegal to grow poppies. And if you go down to the hardware store, you'll see Papaver somniferum seeds. I've never heard of anyone get in trouble for growing those. I'm sure if you were out there with your Taliban outfit and you had your little special knife and you were scraping the stuff and the cops got you for making opium, maybe, but it's not illegal to grow poppies. It's but someone sees you with an industrial hemp plant in Oklahoma and you're in big trouble.
They typically do just cut down the fields, though, don't they? I mean, we haven't seen any hemp farmers prosecuted, have we?
No, but as I mentioned with Alex Whiteplume, the threat of prosecution was enough to make him stop doing it publicly, although nature, as we know from Jurassic Park, nature finds a way. But Dave Monson tried to get the permits up in North Dakota, and DEA kept his $3,000, and they, I guess, gave him a temporary permit in September that was good until December, so that didn't really help him out a whole lot. And Dr. Dave West is probably the only person to get a DEA permit and memorandum of understanding to grow industrial hemp. That was the year 2000 in Hawaii. And they had a 1/4-acre plot there, and the seeds had to be kept in a vault, and it was like Mission Impossible with the laser beams, and you got to come to work hanging from the ceiling or whatever, and they had electrified dogs and razor wire, and it was just ridiculous. And they probably would have kept going because they had the backing of people like David Bronner, who've been extremely generous to the hemp industry. But the problem was that the DEA would delay the permits and say, oh, they're not ready yet until after planting time, and they'd let the seed rot in the warehouse in China or wherever they were getting it from. And so they really had no intention of letting Dave West's work be a success because of the whole stalking horse thing. And I still have yet to figure out why stalking horses are illegal.
It just amazes me. So back to conspiracy theory, and this is probably the last question we have time for, but where is big agriculture in all of this? And, marijuana people are always scared that Philip J. Morris and big tobacco's coming in. My concern more as a parent who feeds children Monsanto and GMO. And do you guys feel like this can stay grassroots and that we can keep it here in Colorado and keep it local?
That is the $1 trillion question, and I don't have a good answer for that. There's somebody at Monsanto probably right now with a spreadsheet open that is trying to figure this out. And the problem with hemp is that there's no pesticide that you can sell with it. There's no Roundup Ready hemp because if you plant 400,000 plants to the acre, you're going to have a canopy established early on, and there aren't going to be any weeds. So is that of interest to Monsanto if they can't sell a weed killer along with it? Or is the profit potential from selling Terminator seeds bigger than that? So we don't know. And I'm sure that Monsanto's not going to talk about it publicly, but I'm kind of a free market guy, and I think that consumers should have the ultimate decision. I don't think that you can legislate these people out of the market, especially because they have so much political influence. You can just make the case for non-GMO foods, and you can fund research that says that perhaps these genes are causing problems in our bodies, and you never know. Maybe in 10, 20 years, Monsanto will come out with a line of organic products because the consumers won't buy the GMO stuff. And they've already In some European countries, they said they don't want the stuff. So if consumers stop buying it, they will stop making it. And that's the only thing that's going to get them out of the business. So there's no telling what they'll do with the hemp industry.
Yeah, unfortunately, in order for consumers to stop buying it, they have to first know what it is and that it's there. Disclosure would be nice to start with.
Yeah, labeling. And I understand that DuPont was instrumental in getting that shot down in California. Our old friend DuPont.
Big Pharma and Big Ag. That is actually one interesting way to kill a DUID bill, though. Just add pharmaceuticals to it, and it will die so fast it'll make your head spin.
Exactly.
That's probably just about all the time we have, but I want to remind you guys about the 3 questions. I got some easy ones this week, so I can't host and write at the same time. I need Genifer back. But reminder to go to iCannabis Facebook page to look at the event section and get all of the questions from all the previous weeks. But this week's questions are, which program supplied soldiers in World War II with hemp products? Question number 2, what is photoremediation? Question 3, if cannabis, the high THC plant, and hemp are grown in the same field, what will happen? And those are the 3 questions. And just a reminder that April 1st will be the last day that we're posting questions, and you can win a airfare credit, prepaid hotel room, and tickets to the Cannabis Cup. And you will have to be on the show live on 420, and we would love to have you win. So we will see, well, we won't see you. We'll talk to all of you next week.